we have reached the final lesson of this course. So far, we have built the foundations, step by step. First, we learned to distinguish serial murder, mass murder, and spree killing. Then we examined motivation, fantasy, internal tension, control, restraint, and escalation. After that, we looked at typologies as tools for comparison, not rigid labels. Now we bring all of those layers together. This final lesson is about case study thinking. Not storytelling, not fascination, not mythology. Case analysis should never turn extreme violence into entertainment. The purpose is to ask what behavior can teach us about psychological process. A strong case analysis begins with structure, then moves to mechanism, pattern, and limitation. What kind of violence is this? How does it unfold? What psychological mechanisms may be involved? Let us begin with a serial pattern. In this type of case, the violence does not appear as one catastrophic moment. It appears across separated episodes. The central question becomes whether the offenses form a psychological and behavioral cycle. Between offenses, the offender may return to fantasy, rehearsal, memory, or renewed internal tension. Repetition is not only a fact, it is information. We ask what repeats across events: victim type, approach, location, level of control, or post-offense behavior. We also ask what changes. Does the offender become more confident, more careless, more ritualized, more violent, or more efficient? Escalation must be demonstrated, not assumed. Some offenders escalate. Some change method. Some stop for long periods. Some are interrupted by circumstances. The deeper question is, what function does repetition serve for this offender? Does it regulate tension, reinforce fantasy, restore control, reduce anxiety, or deepen compulsion? This must never be romanticized. A serial pattern is not a dark legend. It is a repeated structure of behavior that requires careful psychological explanation. Now consider a mass murder pattern. Here, the violence is concentrated into one event. The analysis often turns toward accumulation. In some cases, the offender develops a grievance that becomes central to identity. The world becomes interpreted through injury, resentment, humiliation, or perceived injustice. But grievance is not the same as motive. The question is what the grievance organizes psychologically. Does it organize blame? Does it identify a target? Does it justify violence? Does it create a sense of mission or finality? In many discussions of mass violence, people ask about warning signs. Sometimes there are signals before the act. Threats, fixation, identification with violence, or communication of intent. But signals are not certainty. Not every alarming statement leads to violence, and not every violent act is clearly announced. Serious analysis must remain probabilistic, not prophetic. In a mass murder pattern, we often ask how internal pressure becomes organized into a final act. The act may reflect revenge, despair, control, ideological justification, or a desire to make inner collapse visible. But no case should be reduced to one word. The most difficult cases are mixed. Real offenders often combine elements from several categories. A repeated offender may also be grievance-driven. A mass offender may also show fantasy, planning, identification, and rehearsal. This is why typologies must remain flexible. Categories guide questions. They do not end thinking. So when we analyze a case, we return to 4 anchors. First, time. Is the violence repeated, concentrated, or continuous? Second, mechanism. What psychological processes seem relevant? Third, pattern. What repeats, changes, escalates, or collapses? Fourth, context. What life circumstances, stresses, opportunities, and social conditions shaped the pathway? Understanding these factors does not excuse violence. Explanation and responsibility are not opposites. To explain is not to justify. This is where forensic psychology differs from popular culture. Popular narratives often seek a dramatic identity. Psychological analysis seeks a disciplined explanation. A serious analysis does not ask, "What kind of monster was this?" It asks, "What pathway made this violence possible?" And now the whole course comes together. Definitions help us avoid confusion. Mechanisms help us understand psychological development. Typologies help us compare patterns. Case studies teach us how to apply all of this without falling into myth. That is the value of forensic psychological thinking. Structure instead of chaos, mechanism instead of myth, responsibility without simplification. Serial and mass murderers are not understood by fascination. They are understood by disciplined analysis of how extreme violence develops, takes form, and becomes possible. If you have completed the course, you can access your certificate below.